22 years, 5 nominations, 0 wins. The most famous actor on the planet couldn't win a golden statue that unknowns took home on their first try. There's a man who spent half his life crawling through frozen rivers, eating raw liver, and transforming into characters so completely that audiences forgot they were watching a performance. Critics called him a genius. The box office called him a king. But one institution refused to call his name, and the world watched as rejection became a curse, then a joke, then a cultural phenomenon that haunted him longer than any role ever could. If the pattern had broken sooner, maybe things would be different. Maybe he wouldn't have pushed his body to the edge of death in the Canadian wilderness. Maybe the memes wouldn't have become more famous than his filmography. Maybe the need to prove himself wouldn't have consumed everything else. But here's what nobody asks. What happens to a man who wins everything and still feels empty? Who saves rainforests but flies private jets? Who dates the most beautiful women in the world but never lets any of them stay past their 25th birthday? Who builds a legacy on screen but nothing that lasts beyond it? How does a boy from the poorest streets of Hollywood become the richest prisoner of his own fame? Why did the industry that made him a god spend 2 decades refusing to give him the one thing he desperately wanted? And when he finally got it, why did it feel like he'd won a battle but lost something far more valuable? Before we answer those questions, we need to go back. Back to the cracked sidewalks. Back to the 3 bus rides with his mother. Back to the moment a child made a promise that would either save him or destroy him. Because the Leonardo DiCaprio the world worships, that's just the character he's been playing for 50 years. The real story is the one he's been hiding behind the cameras all along. East Hollywood in the 1970s and 80s was not the glittering paradise tourists imagined. It was a war zone where dreams came to die. Drug deals on corners, prostitutes working the boulevard, sirens cutting through the night. And in the middle of it all, a small apartment where Leonardo DiCaprio raised her son alone, working multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. Leonardo's childhood home sat near the intersection of Hollywood Boulevard and Western Avenue, a location whose name promised glamour but delivered only grit. I remember being jumped by kids who wanted my bike, he recalled years later. I remember seeing things no child should see, things that made me understand how fragile safety really is. His mother became both parents, shield and anchor in a storm that never seemed to end. Ermeline, who had fled Germany as a young woman seeking opportunity, found herself trapped in a cycle of barely making rent, while her son watched her shoulders carry burdens too heavy for one person. She took Leo everywhere. 3 buses to auditions, walking miles when money ran short, sitting in waiting rooms filled with other desperate families chasing the same impossible dream. "My mom is my hero," Leonardo would say decades later, and those who knew them understood it was not Hollywood sentimentality. It was survival. She gave up everything so he could have a chance at something better. His father, George, though separated from Ermeline, remained a presence in Leonardo's life, but a distant one. An artist who lived on the margins of society, creating underground comic books that barely paid the bills. George introduced his son to art, to counterculture, to thinking differently. But he could not offer stability. Their relationship, though loving, was marked by absence, by weekends instead of every day, by good intentions that could not replace presence. School was another battlefield. Leonardo was bright, quick-witted, restless, but also labeled a troublemaker. He struggled to sit still, to follow rules that felt meaningless when the streets outside taught survival in ways classrooms never could. Teachers saw potential, but also disruption. Classmates saw him as different. The kid whose clothes didn't match, whose lunch was sometimes nothing, whose address was the wrong side of every line that divided Los Angeles into haves and have-nots. By 10 years old, Leonardo had already absorbed a truth most children never face. Life was not fair. Opportunity did not come to those who waited. And if you wanted something better, you had to fight for it with everything you had, no matter how small you were, no matter how scared. But in that crucible of poverty and chaos, something unexpected was forged. Not bitterness, but hunger. Not defeat, but defiance. Every rejection his mother faced at auditions. Every door slammed in their faces. Every night they ate cheap food because it was all they could afford. All became fuel for a fire that would one day burn bright enough for the world to see. Leonardo began auditioning young, pushed not by stage parents seeking glory, but by a mother desperate to give her son options she never had. Commercials, television spots, anything that paid. Most doors stayed closed. Casting directors saw a scruffy kid from the wrong neighborhood, not a future star. "You're not what we're looking for," became a phrase he heard so often it lost its sting. But Irmeline never stopped. And Leonardo, watching her refuse to quit, learned the most valuable lesson Hollywood would ever teach him. Rejection was not failure. It was simply the price of admission. Years later, when journalists asked him about his motivation, he would say, "I saw what my mother went through, and I promised myself I would never let her struggle like that again." It was not ambition born of ego. It was ambition born of love, of debt, of a child who watched his hero break herself trying to build him a better life. The boy who grew up dodging needles on Hollywood Boulevard was about to walk into an industry as ruthless as the streets that raised him. But unlike most, Leonardo DiCaprio already knew how to fight. He had been fighting since the day he was born. Armed with nothing but his mother's belief and a stubborn refusal to accept no as final, Leonardo DiCaprio entered the audition circuit at 12 years old. It was not glamorous, it was humiliating. Waiting rooms packed with dozens of kids who looked just like him, or better, or richer, or more connected. Hours of sitting. 5 minutes in front of casting directors who barely looked up from their clipboards. And then the words that became a haunting refrain. "Thank you. We'll call you." They never called. For 3 years, Leonardo collected rejection like most kids collected baseball cards. Cereal commercials, toy ads, background roles in shows no one remembered. His agent kept sending him out, but the industry saw him as forgettable. "Just another kid," one casting director scribbled in notes that would later surface. Nothing special. But Irmeline never wavered. Every rejection, she would squeeze his hand and say, "Their loss. We try again tomorrow." And they did. 3 buses across Los Angeles, arriving early, staying late. Leonardo watched his mother's faith become his armor. Then, in 1990, a crack in the wall appeared. A recurring role on the sitcom Parenthood. Short-lived but visible. Followed by a stint on Santa Barbara, a soap opera that paid the bills but did nothing for his artistic soul. Leonardo was working, but he was not building the career he dreamed of. "I felt like I was stuck," he later admitted, "like I was moving, but not forward." The breakthrough came in 1991 when he landed a recurring role on Growing Pains, one of America's most watched family sitcoms. As Luke Brower, A homeless teenager taken in by the Seaver family, Leonardo finally had a platform. Millions of viewers saw him every week. Fan mail arrived, magazines mentioned his name, but success tasted bittersweet. The role was safe, sanitized, designed for family television. Leonardo could feel the box forming around him. The cute television kid. A label that would make casting directors dismiss him for serious film roles. I was grateful, he said years later, but I was also terrified of being trapped. While Growing Pains aired, Leonardo auditioned obsessively for films. He wanted out of television. He wanted roles that mattered, that challenged him, that proved he was more than a sitcom face. Rejection continued, harsher now because he was too television, too young, too risky for a real budget. Then came 1993, and with it, a miracle disguised as terror. This Boy's Life, directed by Michael Caton Jones, starring Robert De Niro. Leonardo, at 18, was cast as Tobias Wolff, a teenager trapped in an abusive household, opposite one of the greatest actors in history. It should have been a dream. Instead, it was a nightmare of self-doubt. Standing across from De Niro, Leonardo felt every ounce of his inexperience. "I was terrified," he confessed later. "I thought he would see through me, that everyone would realize I didn't belong." But when the cameras rolled, something ignited. Leonardo did not just act. He became. The pain of his own fractured childhood, the fear of his mother's struggles, the rage at a world that tried to keep them small. All of it poured into Tobias. Scene after scene, he matched De Niro, moment for moment, refusing to flinch. When the film premiered, critics noticed. "A revelation," wrote the New York Times. DiCaprio holds his own against De Niro with stunning maturity, praised Variety. Suddenly, Leonardo was not just the kid from Growing Pains. He was a serious actor. But the industry moved slowly. Offers did not flood in. Doors remained cautiously cracked, but not flung open. He was still auditioning, still proving himself, still fighting for roles that went to actors with more credits, more connections, more luck. What kept him going was the memory of those 3 buses with his mother. The promise he made in silence every time she sacrificed for him. "I will make this mean something. I will not let her struggle be for nothing." The hungry years were not over, but Leonardo DiCaprio, the boy from East Hollywood, had tasted possibility. And now, nothing could stop him from devouring every opportunity that came next. Before Leonardo DiCaprio became the prisoner of his own fame, he tasted recognition of a different kind. In 1993, the same year This Boy's Life announced his arrival, he delivered a performance so haunting it would redefine what Hollywood expected from a 19-year-old. What's Eating Gilbert Grape cast him as Arnie, a teenager with developmental disabilities, opposite Johnny Depp. It was a role that demanded complete transformation. Vulnerability without vanity. Truth without technique. Leonardo disappeared into Arnie so completely that when the film premiered, audiences forgot they were watching an actor. Critics were stunned. "DiCaprio is phenomenal," declared Rolling Stone. "He doesn't play Arnie. He becomes him." And then, the validation Leonardo had chased since childhood. An Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. At 19, he stood among Hollywood's elite, recognized not as a sitcom kid, but as a serious artist. He did not win. Tommy Lee Jones took the Oscar that year for The Fugitive. But the nomination was a door kicked open. A signal that Leonardo DiCaprio was no longer a question mark. He was a contender. Yet the industry still hesitated. Serious roles came slowly. Offers were cautious. And then, in 1996, director Baz Luhrmann cast him in Romeo plus Juliet, a hyperkinetic modern adaptation of Shakespeare that turned Leonardo from respected actor into something far more dangerous: a teen idol. Suddenly, his face was everywhere. Magazine covers, bedroom walls, screaming fans outside premieres, teenage girls sobbing at the sight of him. It was adoration, but it was also suffocation. "I felt like a product," Leonardo admitted years later, his voice tight with frustration. "Not an actor, a poster." Hollywood executives saw dollar signs. Here was a young, handsome actor who could sell tickets to audiences studios desperately wanted. And when director James Cameron began casting Titanic, a bloated $200 million gamble on a disaster epic, the pressure to cast Leonardo became undeniable. But Cameron resisted. He wanted an unknown for Jack Dawson, someone audiences could believe was a starving artist. Leonardo, by then, was too famous, too pretty, too teen magazine. "I don't want you," Cameron told him bluntly during their first meeting. "You're not right for this." Leonardo fought back. He read for the part. He screen-tested. He refused to accept no from a director just as stubborn as he was. Finally, reluctantly, Cameron relented. "Fine," he said, "but you better prove me wrong." No one, not Cameron, not the studio, not Leonardo himself, could have predicted what came next. Titanic did not just premiere in December 1997. It detonated. Week after week, it dominated box offices worldwide, shattering every record, becoming a cultural phenomenon that transcended film. And at the center of it all was Leonardo DiCaprio, 23 years old, transformed overnight into the most famous man on the planet. The numbers were staggering. $2.2 billion in global box office, 11 Academy Awards, lines around theaters for months, and Leonardo's face everywhere, inescapable, worshipped by millions who did not care about Gilbert Grape or Romeo plus Juliet. They cared about Jack Dawson, the boy on the bow of the ship, arms spread wide, shouting, "I'm the king of the world!" But for Leonardo, that iconic line became a cruel joke. Because kingship, he discovered, was a prison. The fame was not gradual. It was instant and totalizing. Paparazzi stalked him everywhere. Fans mobbed him at airports, restaurants, gas stations. Privacy became a memory. Walking down a street without being swarmed became impossible. "I couldn't go anywhere," he later confessed. "I felt like I was being hunted." Worse than the loss of anonymity was the loss of credibility. Hollywood, which had once taken him seriously after Gilbert Grape, now saw him only as the Titanic guy. Casting directors dismissed him for serious roles. Directors assumed he was just a pretty face. Critics sneered that his Oscar nomination at 19 was a fluke, that Jack Dawson was not acting but posing. "I was being offered everything," Leonardo said in a rare, vulnerable interview, "except the roles I actually wanted. Romantic leads, teen heartthrobs, sequels and franchises designed to capitalize on his face. Everything that would have buried him deeper into the box the industry was desperate to seal him inside. And the Academy, which had once recognized him, now ignored him. Despite Titanic's 11 Oscar wins, including Best Picture, Leonardo received no nomination. Not even a mention. The message was clear. Box office success and artistic respect do not coexist. Not for him. Not yet. The cruelest irony was that the role he fought so hard to win, the part Cameron did not want to give him, had made him more famous than he ever dreamed possible, and more trapped than he had ever been. "I felt like I made a deal with the devil," he admitted years later, his voice barely above a whisper. "I got everything I thought I wanted, and it nearly destroyed me." Dirt. At 23, Leonardo DiCaprio stood at the peak of global fame, adored by millions, wealthy beyond measure, recognized in every corner of the earth. And he had never felt more invisible. Not as an actor, not as an artist, just as a face on a poster, a name that sold tickets, a symbol of something he never wanted to become. The blessing of Titanic was also its curse, and the fight to escape that curse would define the next 2 decades of his life. Desperate to escape the shadow of Jack Dawson, Leonardo DiCaprio made choices in the years following Titanic that, in hindsight, revealed a young actor thrashing against the current, sometimes swimming in the wrong direction. The Man in the Iron Mask, released in 1998, arrived first. A period piece that felt like a desperate attempt to prove range. It flopped critically and commercially. Then came The Beach in 2000, directed by Danny Boyle, a dark thriller set in Thailand that should have signaled artistic ambition. Instead, it became another cautionary tale. Critics savaged it. Audiences stayed home. And Leonardo, rather than escaping the Titanic trap, seemed to be digging it deeper. "I was lost," he admitted years later. "I was taking roles based on fear, not on truth. Fear that I would be forgotten if I didn't stay visible. Fear that I was not good enough for the roles I actually wanted." Each misstep made casting directors more skeptical, made the industry whisper that maybe he really was just a one-hit wonder, propped up by a sinking ship and a love story. But then, in 2002, salvation arrived in the form of a man who would change everything. Martin Scorsese. Gangs of New York was an epic, violent, sprawling masterpiece about 1860s Manhattan, and Scorsese cast Leonardo as Amsterdam Vallon, a young man seeking revenge in the brutal Five Point slums. It was not a romantic lead. It was not a pretty boy role. It was raw, physical, scarred, exactly what Leonardo needed. Working with Scorsese was baptism by fire. The director demanded take after take, pushed Leonardo beyond technique into instinct, refused to accept anything that smelled like movie star vanity. "He broke me down," Leonardo recalled, "and then he rebuilt me as an actor, not a celebrity." When Gangs of New York premiered, critics noticed the transformation. DiCaprio sheds his teen idol skin and emerges as a formidable dramatic actor, wrote the Los Angeles Times. But the Academy, once again, looked the other way. No nomination, not even a whisper of recognition. The snub stung, but Leonardo pressed forward. Later that same year, he starred in Catch Me If You Can, directed by Steven Spielberg, playing real-life con artist Frank Abagnale Jr. The performance was light, charming, playful. A complete 180 from the darkness of Gangs. It proved something crucial. Leonardo DiCaprio had range. Still, the Oscar conversation remained silent. Then came 2004, and The Aviator, another Scorsese collaboration. This time, Leonardo embodied Howard Hughes, the obsessive aviator and filmmaker whose brilliance was matched only by his spiraling mental illness. It was a towering performance, 3 hours of mania, charm, paranoia, and heartbreak. Leonardo did not just play Hughes, he disappeared into him, capturing the tremors of OCD, the terror of contamination, the isolation of genius. Critics erupted in praise. DiCaprio gives the performance of his career, declared Variety. A tour de force that commands every frame, wrote the New York Times. Surely, they said, this was the year. After being ignored for Titanic, after being snubbed for Gangs, This was the performance that would finally earn him the Academy's respect. The nomination came: Best Actor. Leonardo's second Oscar nod, a full 11 years after his first. On February 27, 2005, he sat in the Kodak Theater, surrounded by peers, cameras trained on his face, waiting for his name to be called. It was not. Jamie Foxx won for Ray, a biopic performance in a category the Academy traditionally loved. Leonardo clapped, smiled for the cameras, and felt the door slam shut once again. But this loss was different. This one started whispers that would soon become roars. "How did Leo not win?" asked headlines the next morning. Fan forums exploded. Internet culture, still in its early days, began to take notice. The narrative was forming. Leonardo DiCaprio, one of the greatest actors of his generation, could not win an Oscar. What began as disappointment was calcifying into something more insidious. A curse, a pattern, a joke that would follow him for over a decade. Behind the smiles at press junkets and the gracious interviews, Leonardo felt the weight of it. Not just the losses, but what they represented. Validation from the one institution whose approval he had chased since he was 19. "It mattered to me," he confessed years later, his voice quiet. "More than I wanted to admit. More than it should have." Friends close to him saw the toll. He threw himself into work, choosing roles with even more intensity, as if perfect performances could force the Academy's hand. But perfection, he was learning, was not enough. Popularity could doom you. Beauty could disqualify you. And sometimes, no matter how deeply you transformed, the industry simply refused to see past the boy standing on the bow of a ship, arms spread wide, still shouting words that haunted him. The aviator loss was not just a defeat. It was the beginning of a narrative Leonardo could not escape. The Oscar curse had officially begun, and the world was watching, waiting to see how long it would take before the most famous actor on earth would finally hear his name called, or if he ever would. If Martin Scorsese had not entered Leonardo DiCaprio's life, the actor might have remained forever trapped in the beautiful cage Titanic built for him. But their partnership, which began with Gangs of New York, evolved into something deeper than director and actor. It became artistic salvation. In 2006, they reunited for The Departed, a brutal crime thriller set in the underbelly of Boston. Leonardo played Billy Costigan, an undercover cop slowly unraveling under the weight of living a double life. It was acting stripped to the bone. No vanity, no charm, just raw nerve endings exposed to the camera. Scene after scene, Leonardo delivered. The rooftop confrontation, the therapy sessions dripping with paranoia, the final moments of betrayal. Critics called it his best work yet. DiCaprio has fully matured into one of the finest actors of his generation, praised The Hollywood Reporter. When Oscar nominations were announced, The Departed swept in with 8 nods, including Best Picture. Leonardo waited for his name. It never came. The Academy nominated his co-star Mark Wahlberg for supporting actor. But Leonardo, the emotional center of the film, was invisible. And then, the ultimate insult, The Departed won Best Picture. The film Leonardo carried won the highest honor in cinema. Martin Scorsese, after decades of being snubbed himself, finally won Best Director. But Leonardo sat in the audience, clapping for everyone else's triumph, his own contribution erased from the narrative. "It hurt," someone close to him revealed years later. Not just the snub, but watching everyone around him win for a film he gave everything to. But Leonardo did not retreat. He doubled down. In 2010, he and Scorsese created Shutter Island, a psychological thriller where Leonardo played Teddy Daniels, a U.S. Marshal investigating a psychiatric facility while descending into madness. It was a performance of devastating complexity, playing sanity and delusion simultaneously, making audiences question every frame. The film was a commercial success, earning over $294 million worldwide. Critics praised Leonardo's haunting intensity. But when awards season arrived, silence. Not even a nomination. The Academy looked the other way, as if his work was invisible. Then came 2013, and The Wolf of Wall Street, the film that should have ended the curse forever. As Jordan Belfort, the drug-addled stockbroker who defrauded millions, Leonardo delivered a performance so explosive, so fearless, so utterly unhinged that it seemed impossible to ignore. He snorted cocaine off a woman's body. He crawled across a country club floor, paralyzed by quaaludes. He delivered the "sell me this pen" speech with predatory charisma. He screamed, seduced, destroyed, and rebuilt himself across 3 hours of controlled chaos. It was not just acting, it was possession. Leonardo became Belfort so completely that audiences forgot they were watching a movie. They were witnessing a man on fire, burning through every limitation, every boundary, every shred of vanity. The best performance of the decade, declared Time magazine. DiCaprio gives the role of a lifetime, wrote The Guardian. The Golden Globes agreed, awarding him Best Actor in a Musical or Comedy. Surely, they all said, this was it. This was the year the curse would break. The Oscar nomination came. His fourth. Best Actor for The Wolf of Wall Street. On March 2, 2014, he sat once again in the Dolby Theater, older now, weathered by a decade of defeats, but still hoping, still believing that maybe, finally, the Academy would see what everyone else saw. Matthew McConaughey's name was called for Dallas Buyers Club. Leonardo clapped, smiled, and felt something inside him harden. 4 nominations, 0 wins, a track record that would have broken lesser actors. The memes were now inescapable. "Leo will never win an Oscar" became internet gospel. Twitter exploded with jokes. Photoshopped images of Leonardo reaching for the statue, forever out of reach. What made it unbearable was not the losses themselves, but what they represented. Validation from peers. Recognition from the industry he had given his entire life to. "I don't make movies for awards," he would tell interviewers, the line rehearsed and hollow. But those close to him knew the truth. It mattered. It haunted him. The Scorsese era had transformed Leonardo into one of the greatest actors alive. 5 films together, each a masterclass in character work, each proof that he had evolved far beyond Jack Dawson. Yet the Academy's message was clear. Greatness was not enough. Popularity disqualified you. And some actors, no matter how brilliant, were destined to chase respect that would never arrive. At 40, Leonardo DiCaprio had wealth, fame, and a legacy of performances that would endure for generations. But the one thing he truly wanted, the simple validation of his peers holding up a golden statue and saying, "You are enough," remained cruelly, maddeningly, impossibly out of reach. The curse was no longer a joke. It was a scar, and the only question left was whether he would spend the rest of his career bleeding from it. In the summer of 2010, Christopher Nolan's Inception hit theaters like a cultural earthquake. A mind-bending thriller about dreams within dreams, It grossed over $830 million worldwide and became one of the most discussed films of the decade. At its center was Leonardo DiCaprio as Dom Cobb, a haunted thief navigating layers of subconscious with the weight of guilt crushing him at every level. It was a performance of quiet devastation. No screaming, no theatrics, just a man drowning in grief, playing every scene with the exhaustion of someone who no longer believed in redemption. Critics called it mesmerizing. Audiences left theaters debating not just the ending, but Cobb's emotional journey. When Oscar nominations arrived, Inception earned 8, including Best Picture, Cinematography, Sound, Visual Effects, all recognized. But Best Actor? Silence. Leonardo's name was nowhere. The Academy honored the spectacle, but ignored the soul at its center. The snub was no longer surprising. It was expected. And that expectation, that resigned certainty that Leonardo would never win, had metastasized into something far more public and far more cruel. A meme. The internet, by 2010, had evolved into a machine of relentless commentary. And Leonardo DiCaprio's Oscar losses became its favorite punchline. Image macros flooded social media. Leonardo reaching for the statue, forever out of reach. Leonardo at award shows, photoshopped into scenes of eternal disappointment. Poor Leo became shorthand for unfair rejection. By 2012, when Quentin Tarantino cast him in Django Unchained as Calvin Candy, a sadistic plantation owner, Leonardo delivered another transformative performance. He played evil with terrifying charisma, smashing his hand on a dinner table so hard he actually bled mid-scene and kept acting, the blood becoming part of the character. It was fearless, unforgettable, the kind of supporting turn that traditionally earned Oscar nominations. It did not. Once again, the Academy looked past him. Christoph Waltz, his co-star, won Best Supporting Actor. Leonardo went home empty-handed, his brilliance acknowledged everywhere except the one place that mattered, and the memes intensified. Maybe next year, Leo. The Academy hates Leonardo DiCaprio. Give this man his Oscar. What began as internet jokes evolved into a legitimate cultural narrative. News outlets wrote think pieces analyzing why the Academy kept snubbing him. Late-night hosts made it a running gag. Even casual moviegoers who could not name 5 Leonardo films knew one fact: he could not win an Oscar. The cruelty was not in the mockery itself, but in how it overshadowed his work. People stopped discussing his performances and started discussing his losses. Inception, Django, The Wolf of Wall Street. Masterful films reduced to footnotes in the "When Will Leo Finally Win" saga. It became bigger than me, Leonardo admitted in a guarded moment. I felt like I was no longer in control of my own story. The world decided what my career was about, and it was not about the work anymore. It was about a statue I did not have. The pressure mounted. Fans launched petitions. Social media campaigns demanded justice. The Academy was painted as blind, stubborn, cruel for ignoring someone so obviously deserving. And Leonardo, who had spent his entire life trying to prove he was more than a pretty face, now found himself reduced to a symbol of institutional failure. The ultimate irony was devastating. He had escaped the Titanic trap, transformed into one of the most respected actors alive, worked with the greatest directors of his generation, and delivered performances that would be studied for decades. Yet, when people thought of Leonardo DiCaprio, they no longer thought of his art. They thought of what he did not have. And that absence, that empty space where a golden statue should have been, became louder than every word he ever spoke on screen. By 2015, Leonardo DiCaprio had nothing left to prove, except everything. 4 Oscar nominations, 0 wins, 22 years since his first nod for Gilbert Grape. A career of transformative performances reduced to a punchline. And at 41 years old, he made a choice that would either finally break the curse or break him. The Revenant. Director Alejandro González Iñárritu pitched it as a vision, not a film. The true story of Hugh Glass, a frontiersman left for dead in the 1820s wilderness, crawling through frozen hell to survive. It would be shot in chronological order, using only natural light, in some of the most remote and hostile locations on Earth. No studios, no comfort, no mercy. "I need you to suffer," Iñárritu told Leonardo. Really suffer. And Leonardo, carrying 2 decades of rejection, said yes. The shoot began in the Canadian Rockies in October 2015, and within weeks, it became clear this was not filmmaking. It was endurance. Temperatures plunged to 40 degrees below zero. Leonardo spent hours submerged in frozen rivers, his body shaking so violently the crew feared hypothermia. He slept inside the carcass of a dead horse for one scene, the stench and cold seeping into his skin. He ate raw bison liver, the blood and bile making him gag between takes. "It was the most difficult thing I've ever done," he later confessed. And those who worked on the film saw it was not hyperbole. It was survival. Crew members quit. Production dragged from months into nearly a year. The budget ballooned to $135 million. And through it all, Leonardo crawled through snow, bled into mud, and pushed his body past every limit he thought existed. Iñárritu was relentless, take after take, even when Leonardo's lips were blue, even when his hands could not stop trembling. "Again," the director would say, "slower, deeper, more pain." There were no stunt doubles for most scenes, no warm trailers between shots, just Leonardo, the camera, and the merciless cold. "There were moments I thought I would die out there," he admitted in an interview, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Not dramatically, literally. My body was shutting down." But what kept him moving was not the art. It was the desperation, the gnawing, unspoken belief that if this performance, this level of sacrifice, did not earn the Academy's respect, nothing ever would. The Revenant was not just a film. It was a referendum. On his career, on his worthiness, on whether 2 decades of chasing validation had been a noble pursuit or a tragic waste. When the film premiered in December 2015, the response was immediate and overwhelming. "DiCaprio delivers a primal, visceral performance unlike anything he's done before," declared Variety. "This is not acting. This is raw human endurance captured on film," wrote The Hollywood Reporter. The Golden Globes awarded him Best Actor. The BAFTAs followed. The momentum was undeniable. And yet, Leonardo could not let himself believe. He had been here before. 4 times before. Hope, he had learned, was just another setup for humiliation. On February 28, 2016, he sat once again in the Dolby Theater. 5th nomination, Best Actor for The Revenant. Around him, peers, cameras, the weight of the world watching to see if the curse would finally break, or if the Academy would deliver one more cruel rejection. When Julianne Moore opened the envelope and said, "And the Oscar goes to Leonardo DiCaprio," the theater erupted. Standing ovation. Tears in the audience. The internet exploding in real-time celebration. 22 years, 5 nominations, Finally, Leonardo walked to the stage, holding the statue for the first time, and his hands shook. Not from cold this time, but from something far more complex: relief, vindication, and beneath it all, an ache he could not name. His speech was measured, gracious, focused on climate change rather than personal triumph. "I do not take this for granted," he said, voice steady. But those who knew him saw the truth behind his eyes. This was not just joy, it was exhaustion. The weight of 2 decades of wanting something so badly that finally having it felt almost hollow. Backstage, clutching the Oscar, he told reporters, "It's surreal." And in that single word was a confession he could not fully articulate. The thing he had chased for so long, the validation that had consumed him, was now in his hands. And it felt smaller than he imagined. Heavier. Stranger. In the weeks that followed, Leonardo did not float. He withdrew. Friends noticed the quietness, the lack of celebration beyond the obligatory press. "I thought I would feel different," he admitted to someone close. "I thought this would change something." But the Oscar did not erase the years of rejection. It did not undo the memes, the humiliation, the nights he went home empty-handed while lesser performances won. It did not answer the question that haunted him in the silent hours: was it worth it? All the suffering, all the sacrifice, all the frozen rivers and raw liver, and crawling through snow until my body broke. Was it worth a golden statue and applause that faded in days? The Revenant won him the Oscar. But the cost was written on his body, in the scars no one could see, in the part of himself he left buried in the Canadian snow. He had proven, finally, that he was enough. But the proof felt like a Pyrrhic victory. The curse was broken. But Leonardo DiCaprio, at 41, holding the statue he spent half his life chasing, could not shake the feeling that he had won a battle and lost something far more valuable in the process. Long before Leonardo DiCaprio stood on the Oscar stage in 2016, he had already built another legacy, one that had nothing to do with awards and everything to do with survival. Not his own, but the planet's. In 1998, at just 24 years old, flush with Titanic money and global fame, Leonardo created the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation. While most young actors bought mansions and sports cars, he funneled millions into environmental conservation, climate change research, and wildlife protection. It was not a publicity stunt. It was a mission born from childhood memories of hiking with his father George through California's disappearing wilderness. "I saw the world changing," Leonardo explained in an early interview, his voice carrying an urgency rare for someone so young. "And I realized if people like me, with resources and a platform, don't fight for it, who will?" Over the next 2 decades, the foundation donated over $100 million to environmental causes, protecting endangered species, funding renewable energy projects, supporting indigenous communities, fighting deforestation. The numbers were staggering, the commitment undeniable. Leonardo did not just write checks. He produced documentaries. The 11th Hour in 2007, Before the Flood in 2016, Ice on Fire in 2019. Films that brought climate science to millions who might never read a research paper. In 2014, he addressed the United Nations Climate Summit, standing before world leaders and delivering a speech that went viral. "You can make history," he declared, "or be vilified by it." His passion was raw, unscripted, the same intensity he brought to The Revenant, now channeled into saving ecosystems instead of fictional characters. Environmental groups praised him. Scientists thanked him. Awards for activism piled up alongside his acting accolades. Leonardo DiCaprio, the Foundation's literature proclaimed, had donated more money to environmental causes than almost any celebrity in history. But then came the backlash. And it was merciless. Critics pointed to the contradictions impossible to ignore. Leonardo preached carbon reduction while flying on private jets to climate conferences. He warned about ocean pollution from the deck of a $150 million super yacht. He attended Coachella on a helicopter, vacationed on yachts in the Mediterranean, threw parties in Malibu mansions that consumed more electricity in a weekend than average families used in a year. The New York Post ran a scathing exposé calculating his carbon footprint: 6 private jet flights in 6 weeks. Forbes estimated his annual emissions at over 418 tons of carbon dioxide, nearly 20 times the average American. Environmentalists who once celebrated him began asking uncomfortable questions. How can he demand sacrifices from ordinary people while refusing to make them himself? The criticism reached a fever pitch in 2016 when he accepted his Oscar and delivered a passionate climate change speech, then flew to Cannes on a private jet days later. Social media erupted. Hypocrite trended for days. Memes mocked him as the climate fraud, a wealthy elite lecturing the masses while living in luxury that actively destroyed what he claimed to protect. Leonardo's defense was measured but strained. "I offset my carbon footprint," he told interviewers. "I invest in green technology. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying." Yet the explanations felt hollow to critics, who pointed out that carbon offsets were, at best, buying indulgences for environmental sins, and at worst, meaningless greenwashing. The uncomfortable truth sat like a stone in the middle of his activism. Leonardo DiCaprio wanted to save the world, but he was not willing to give up the privileges that came with being Leonardo DiCaprio. Private jets meant privacy, safety from the fans who still mobbed him in airports. Yachts meant escape from paparazzi. Mansions meant security his fame required. "I'm caught in a system I didn't create," he said quietly, in a rare candid moment. "But I'm also benefiting from it. I know that, and I don't have an answer that makes everyone happy, including myself." The complexity was damning. His foundation had protected millions of acres of rainforest, funded breakthrough renewable energy research, and brought climate science into mainstream conversation. Undeniably, objectively, he had done more for the environment than 99% of people criticizing him. But he had also burned more fossil fuels in a single vacation than most people would in a lifetime. And that contradiction, the gap between his words and his life, became impossible to ignore. Leonardo DiCaprio wanted to be both the savior and the celebrity. And the world, watching him fly private to climate summits, was no longer sure he could be both. If Leonardo DiCaprio's environmental contradictions sparked debate, his romantic life ignited a cultural firestorm that burned hotter with each passing year. Because somewhere in the decades between Titanic and today, the world noticed a pattern so consistent it became impossible to ignore. Leonardo DiCaprio, one of the most eligible bachelors on the planet, dated only women under the age of 25. Not occasionally. Not coincidentally. Always. The list read like a roster of supermodels and actresses, each relationship following an eerily predictable script. Gisele Bündchen, 18 when they began dating in 1999, relationship ended when she turned 23. Bar Raffaelli, 20 when they met, separated just before her 26th birthday. Blake Lively, 23. Erin Heatherton, 22. Tony Garn, 20. Kelly Rohrbach, 24. Nina Agdal, 24. Camilla Morone, 20 when they started dating, 25 when it ended. By 2022, the pattern was so pronounced that Reddit users created a viral graph charting Leonardo's age against his girlfriend's ages over 3 decades. His line climbed steadily upward from 25 to 48. Theirs remained frozen, a flat line hovering between 19 and 25, never rising above it. The internet named it Leo's Law. The rule, stated with dark humor, was simple. Leonardo DiCaprio does not date women over 25. The memes were relentless. Jokes about girlfriends aging out of his dating pool. Photoshopped images of Leonardo holding a calendar, counting down until his partner's 25th birthday. But beneath the humor was a question that grew sharper and more uncomfortable with each year. Why? Critics did not hold back. It's creepy, wrote cultural commentators. A 50-year-old man exclusively dating women barely out of college reveals a disturbing power dynamic. Feminist voices pointed to the inherent imbalance. Leonardo, with decades of fame, wealth, and industry influence, dating women young enough to have grown up watching his films, women at the beginning of their careers, women who idolized him before they ever met him. He's not dating equals, one critic argued. He's dating fans. And that's not a relationship. It's a power trip. The hashtag #MeToo movement, which erupted in 2017, added fuel to the fire. Suddenly, Hollywood's culture of older, powerful men dating much younger women was no longer dismissed as just how things are. It was interrogated, dissected, condemned. And Leonardo, though never accused of misconduct, found himself lumped into conversations about exploitation, about men who used fame to access youth, about patterns that society was finally ready to question. His defenders pushed back. They're adults, they argued, consenting adults making their own choices. Leonardo isn't breaking any laws. He's not forcing anyone into anything. They pointed out that the women he dated were successful in their own right, models and actresses with agency and careers. This is ageism, some claimed, shaming a man for having preferences. But the counter-argument was swift and damning. Preference suggests variety. Leonardo's pattern suggested something else, an unwillingness or inability to connect with women his own age, a need to be the older, wiser, more powerful figure in every relationship, and most disturbingly, a clock that started ticking the moment a girlfriend approached her mid-20s. When his relationship with Camilla Morone ended in 2022, just months after her 25th birthday, the internet erupted. Like clockwork, the headlines read, what might have once been dismissed as coincidence was now undeniable pattern. And patterns, especially ones this consistent, demand explanation. Leonardo has never publicly addressed it directly. In rare interviews when asked about relationships, he deflects with practiced ease. My personal life is private, he insists. I don't owe anyone an explanation for who I love. And legally, ethically in the strictest sense, he is right. Every relationship was between consenting adults. No laws broken, no accusations of abuse. But the silence itself became damning. Because the refusal to engage with the question, the steadfast insistence on privacy, looked to critics less like dignity and more like avoidance. What was he not saying? What did the pattern reveal about him that he was unwilling to confront publicly? Some psychologists weighed in, suggesting the behavior reflected arrested development. A man frozen emotionally at the age he became famous. At 23, Leonardo became the most famous person on Earth, one noted. Perhaps he never moved past that moment. Perhaps he's still the boy from Titanic. And dating younger women is the only way he feels he can return to who he was before fame consumed him. Others were less generous. It's narcissism, they argued. Older women challenge you, question you, expect emotional maturity. Younger women are more likely to admire, to defer, to let you remain the star of your own life. The truth, as always, was likely more complex than either extreme. But complexity did not matter to a public tired of watching powerful men skate past accountability with shrugs and silence. Leonardo DiCaprio had spent his career demanding respect as an artist. He had won the Oscar, proven his talent, built a legacy. But his romantic choices, deliberate or subconscious, had become a shadow that followed him everywhere. And unlike the Oscar curse that finally broke, this pattern showed no signs of changing. At 50, Leonardo DiCaprio remained one of the most celebrated actors alive. And yet, the question lingered, uncomfortable and unanswered. What does it say about a man when he refuses to grow old with anyone but himself? At 50 years old, Leonardo DiCaprio stands at the peak of everything he once dreamed of achieving. An Oscar winner, a cinematic legend whose filmography reads like a masterclass in acting. A fortune estimated at over $300 million. Properties in Los Angeles, New York, and a private island in Belize. Partnerships with the greatest directors of his generation. Scorsese, Tarantino, Nolan, Iñárritu. He is selective now in ways only the truly successful can afford to be. One film every 2 or 3 years, and only if the director, script, and vision meet his exacting standards. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 2019 with Tarantino. Don't Look Up in 2021, a climate satire with Adam McKay. Killers of the Flower Moon in 2023, another Scorsese masterpiece. Each performance measured, deliberate, proof that age has not dulled his abilities but sharpened them. Critics still praise him. Audiences still show up. His name on a poster guarantees attention. By every measurable metric, Leonardo DiCaprio has won. And yet, in the quiet moments away from cameras, a question hangs in the air, unspoken but undeniable. What was it all for? His peers from the Titanic era have moved into different chapters. Matt Damon, married with 4 daughters. Ben Affleck, divorced but a father, navigating life beyond fame. Brad Pitt, complicated personal history, but children who call him Dad. Even George Clooney, the perpetual bachelor, eventually married and became a father in his 50s. Leonardo has none of that. No wife, no children, no legacy beyond the films. "I'm married to my work," he has said in interviews, a line that sounds romantic until you realize it is also a confession of isolation. Friends describe him as generous, thoughtful, deeply committed to his environmental foundation. But they also describe a man who keeps people at arm's length, who trusts few, who has built walls so high that even those closest to him sometimes wonder if they truly know him. He's lonely, one longtime friend admitted off the record. He would never say it, but you can see it. All the yachts, all the parties, all the models. It's filling space that something else should occupy. And I don't think he knows what that something is. The absence of children haunts in ways Leonardo may not even admit to himself. No one to carry his name. No one to inherit the foundation he built. No grandchildren to teach about the environment he spent decades protecting. When he is gone, his films will remain, but the man himself will vanish into history. There is a particular cruelty to achieving everything professionally and so little personally. The Oscar sits on a shelf. The millions sit in accounts. The island remains mostly empty. And Leonardo DiCaprio, who spent 50 years proving he was worthy of love from an industry that kept rejecting him, never stopped long enough to build love that did not require proving anything at all. At 50, he has won every battle. But the war for meaning, for connection, for something beyond the next film and the next headline remains unsettlingly unfinished. Leonardo DiCaprio's story is not a tragedy, but it is not a triumph either. It is something more complicated, more human, and far more haunting. He escaped poverty. He conquered Hollywood. He won the Oscar that tormented him for 22 years. He donated over $100 million to save a planet he will leave behind. He built a filmography that will be studied for generations. By every measure society offers, he succeeded. And yet, the question refuses to disappear. At what cost? The boy who grew up dodging needles on Hollywood Boulevard became a man who cannot walk down any boulevard without being swarmed. The actor who fought for respect became so famous that respect felt hollow when it finally arrived. The environmentalist who warns of catastrophe flies private jets to deliver the warning. The romantic lead of a generation has never allowed anyone close enough to grow old with him. Leonardo DiCaprio gave everything to perfection. And perfection, it turns out, is a jealous master. It demanded his privacy, his youth, his chance at a normal life, his ability to trust, his willingness to be vulnerable with anyone who was not a camera. He won the Oscar, but he lost the anonymity that makes life bearable. He saved rainforests, but he could not save himself from the contradictions of living as both activist and celebrity. He dated the most beautiful women in the world, but he never let any of them see him long enough to know the man behind the legend. Perhaps that is the deepest truth of his life. Leonardo DiCaprio, one of the most watched people on Earth, remains almost entirely unseen. We know his characters. We know his causes. We know his patterns. But we do not know him. And maybe, after 50 years of cameras and scrutiny, and performances that stripped him bare on screen, he prefers it that way. His legacy will endure. The films, the foundation, the image of a young man standing on the bow of a ship, arms spread wide, shouting into the wind. But the man himself, the one who cried in his mother's arms after auditions, who crawled through frozen rivers for validation, who built walls so high even he cannot see over them. That man remains a mystery. And perhaps the saddest part is this. Leonardo DiCaprio spent his entire life proving he was worthy of love. And in the process, he forgot to let anyone love him at all. Now, the question turns to you. What lesson will you take from Leonardo's journey? That fame is not fulfillment? That success without connection is just decorated emptiness? That sometimes the things we chase hardest leave us loneliest when we finally catch them? Leonardo DiCaprio is not a villain. He is a mirror, a reflection of what happens when talent, ambition, and hunger collide with an industry designed to consume, not to nourish. His story asks uncomfortable questions about what we value, what we sacrifice, and whether the pedestals we build for our heroes are really just elegant cages. Share your thoughts below. Subscribe for more untold stories that reveal the humanity behind the headlines. And remember, the greatest performances are not always on screen. Sometimes they are the ones we give every day, convincing the world and ourselves that we are fine. Because behind every legend is a person, flawed, complicated, searching for something that no Oscar, no yacht, no standing ovation can ever provide. And that person, more often than not, is just as lost as the rest of us.